The general barked a command. No one understood until the cleaning lady snapped to attention. General Marcus Thompson had seen 3 wars, commanded thousands of soldiers, and earned more medals than he could count on both hands. At 62, his silver hair was perfectly trimmed, his uniform pressed to military precision, and his voice could silence an entire room with just a whisper. But on this particular Tuesday morning at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Chicago, something was terribly wrong. The general sat in his wheelchair, staring out the window of the rehabilitation center's main hall. His wife Eleanor had brought him here after the stroke 6 months ago, left him struggling with words that once flowed like commands on a battlefield. The doctors called it aphasia, a cruel twist of fate for a man whose life had been built on clear, decisive communication. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the polished hallway, humming softly to herself. She had worked at this hospital for 15 years, arriving every morning at 5:30 to begin her rounds. At 54, Maria was a small woman with gentle hands and kind eyes that had seen too much hardness in life. She had immigrated from El Salvador 30 years ago, speaking no English, carrying nothing but hope and determination in a worn canvas bag. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows as Maria approached the rehabilitation wing. She always started here because the patients seemed to sleep later, giving her time to clean without disturbing their rest. But today was different. She could hear raised voices coming from the main gathering area. "Sir, please try to calm down," a young nurse was saying, her voice strained with frustration. "We can't understand what you need." Maria slowed her cart and peered around the corner. General Thompson was in his wheelchair, his face red with frustration, gesturing wildly at something across the room. His mouth was moving rapidly, but the sounds coming out made no sense to anyone listening. The words were jumbled, disconnected like a radio with poor reception. "Come, det, fell." "Marsh!" the general shouted, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command, even though the words themselves seemed meaningless. 3 hospital staff members surrounded him: a nurse, a physical therapist, and Dr. Williams, the head of the rehabilitation department. They looked at each other helplessly, clearly struggling to understand what their patient desperately wanted to communicate. Eleanor Thompson stood nearby, tears threatening to spill from her tired eyes. She had watched her husband of 38 years transform from a man who could inspire armies to someone who couldn't ask for a glass of water without tremendous effort. The doctors had explained that his brain knew what he wanted to say, but the pathways to get those thoughts to his mouth had been damaged by the stroke. "Marcus, honey, please try to slow down," Eleanor said softly, reaching for his hand. But the general pulled away, his frustration mounting with each passing second. Maria had seen this scene before with other patients. Brain injuries were cruel that way. They trapped brilliant minds inside bodies that no longer obeyed. She had learned to read beyond words during her years here, watching faces and hands and eyes to understand what people really needed. The general continued his incomprehensible commands, pointing repeatedly toward the corner of the room, where a small American flag hung beside a portrait of previous hospital directors. His gestures became more urgent, more military-like, as if he were directing troops in some invisible battle. "Should we call his neurologist?" the nurse whispered to Dr. Williams. "Calm, Dad." "Marsh! Marsh!" General Thompson's voice echoed through the hall. Maria found herself stepping closer, drawn by something familiar in the rhythm of his words. She had heard similar sounds before, long ago in a different life. Her father had been a soldier too, before he disappeared during the Civil War in El Salvador. She remembered the way he would bark orders to his men, the cadence and tone that transcended language barriers. The hospital staff continued their attempts to calm the general, but his agitation only grew. His military training was showing through the fog of his damaged brain. He was giving orders, expecting them to be followed, and becoming increasingly frustrated when no one responded appropriately. "Maybe we should sedate him," Dr. Williams murmured, making notes on his clipboard. Eleanor's shoulders sagged. This wasn't the first time they had discussed medication to control her husband's outbursts. But she knew that somewhere inside that confused mind was still the sharp, brilliant man she had married. The man who had planned complex military operations and solved problems that stumped entire teams of strategists. Maria watched as the general's eyes scanned the room frantically. His gaze settled on the flag again, and his pointing became more insistent. There was purpose in his movements, intelligence behind the confusion. She could see it even if the others couldn't. The cleaning lady had learned many things during her 15 years at this hospital. She had learned that patience was often more valuable than medicine, that small acts of kindness could change entire days, and that sometimes the most important conversations happened without words at all. She remembered her own early years in America, when English felt impossible and every interaction was a struggle. The frustration of having thoughts trapped inside, unable to escape in the right language. The way people would speak louder and slower, as if volume and speed were the problems, not understanding. As Maria continued to observe, she noticed something the others had missed. The general's movements weren't random. They followed a pattern: point to the flag, gesture toward the door, then sweep his arm in a wide arc that encompassed the entire room. He was trying to organize something, to put things in proper order. His wife approached him again, this time kneeling beside his wheelchair. "Marcus, I know you're trying to tell us something important, but we need you to help us understand." The general looked at his wife with eyes that held decades of shared memories. For a moment, his face softened, and Maria could see the love that had sustained their marriage through deployments and dangers, and now this new kind of battle. But then the frustration returned, stronger than before. Marsh!" he shouted again, his voice cracking with the effort. Maria made a decision that would change everything. She stepped forward, leaving her cleaning cart behind, moving closer to this man who reminded her so much of her lost father. She had spent years in the shadows of this hospital, invisible to most people, just another worker in uniform. But today something told her to step into the light. Maria approached the group slowly, her cleaning supplies forgotten. The medical staff turned to look at her with surprise. Cleaning personnel rarely interrupted patient care, especially not during crisis moments like this one. "Excuse me," Maria said quietly, her accent still thick after 3 decades in America. "I think maybe I understand something." Dr. Williams frowned slightly. Protocol dictated that only medical professionals should interact with patients during episodes like this, but something in Maria's calm demeanor made him hesitate before dismissing her. General Thompson's eyes locked onto Maria as she drew closer. His shouting stopped abruptly, replaced by an intense focus that seemed to pierce through the fog of his condition. For the first time in 10 minutes, he was completely still. He said again, but this time quieter, more controlled. His eyes never left Maria's face. Maria nodded slowly. She had spent her childhood around soldiers before the war tore her family apart. Her father, Sergeant Carlos Santos, had trained local militia groups in their mountain village. She remembered the foreign advisors who came to help train the government forces. Some spoke languages that sounded similar to what the general was attempting now. "You are trying to give orders," Maria said simply, speaking directly to the general. Like a soldier, the medical staff exchanged glances. Eleanor leaned forward, hope flickering in her tired eyes. "Marsh," the general said clearly, pointing at Maria. Then he gestured toward the flag again. Maria followed his gaze and suddenly understood. The flag wasn't hanging properly. One corner had come loose from its mounting, causing it to droop sideways. To a military man, especially one who had spent his entire career respecting protocol and ceremony, this would be deeply disturbing. "The flag?" Maria said. "You want the flag fixed?" General Thompson's face lit up with the first genuine smile he had shown in weeks. He nodded vigorously, his eyes bright with relief that someone finally understood. "But why couldn't we figure that out?" the nurse asked, clearly puzzled. Maria walked over to examine the flag more closely. "Because you were listening to English. But he is not speaking English right now. The words, they sound like German maybe, or Dutch. Some European language mixing with English in his brain." Dr. Williams stepped forward, his medical curiosity piqued. "That's actually not uncommon with aphasia patients who have multilingual backgrounds. The brain sometimes retrieves words from different languages randomly." "General Thompson, did you serve in Europe?" Eleanor gasped softly. "Oh my goodness, yes. He was stationed in Germany for 3 years early in his career. He had to learn basic German for liaison work with NATO forces." The pieces began falling into place. Maria had recognized the military cadence because it was universal. The rhythm of command existed in every army, regardless of language. But the actual words were fragments of German that had somehow become accessible to his damaged brain when English failed him. Marsh means march in German, Eleanor said, understanding dawning on her face. He was trying to say march, like getting everyone to attention to fix the flag properly. General Thompson began speaking again, more calmly now. Come here, bitte, Maria smiled. Come here, please. He wants someone to come help with the flag. The transformation in the room was remarkable. What had seemed like meaningless shouting minutes before now revealed itself as a frustrated officer trying to maintain proper military standards, even from his wheelchair. The general had seen the drooping flag and wanted it corrected, but his brain could only access German military commands to express this need. Maria approached the flag and carefully straightened it, smoothing out the wrinkles and ensuring it hung properly. General Thompson watched every movement with the critical eye of an inspection officer. Gut, he said when she finished. Danke. Good, thank you, Eleanor translated, tears of relief streaming down her face. He said good, thank you. Dr. Williams was taking rapid notes. This is a significant breakthrough. If we can identify the trigger languages and common vocabulary, we might be able to develop better communication strategies. But Maria wasn't thinking about medical breakthroughs. She was remembering her father's voice calling commands across their village square. The pride in his posture when he trained young men to defend their homes. She saw that same pride returning to General Thompson's face as the flag hung properly once again. You are a good soldier, Maria told him in her simple English. A good leader. This does not change because of sickness. The general's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than frustration. For months he had felt diminished, reduced to a man who couldn't even ask for basic needs. But Maria saw him as he truly was, a career military officer whose standards and values remained intact, even when his speech had been stolen. Sergeant Santos, he said suddenly. The words coming out clearly in English. Everyone froze. These were the first clear English words he had spoken all morning. My father, Maria whispered. His name was Carlos Santos. He was a sergeant. General Thompson nodded slowly. Something in Maria's bearing, her instinctive understanding of military protocol, had triggered a memory and somehow unlocked a pathway in his brain. Good soldier, he said in English, pointing at Maria. Like her father. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This cleaning lady, who most staff barely noticed as she went about her daily work, had not only solved the immediate crisis but had connected with the general on a level that transcended his medical condition. Eleanor approached Maria with tears in her eyes. How did you know? How did you understand when none of us could? Maria looked at the flag now hanging proudly in its proper position. Because some things are the same everywhere. Honor, respect, duty. These do not need perfect words. Dr. Williams cleared his throat. Maria, would you be willing to work with our speech therapy team? Your insights could help not just General Thompson, but other patients struggling with similar issues. Before Maria could answer, General Thompson spoke again. This time his words were a mixture of English and German, but his meaning was crystal clear. Maria, gut soldier, help me, bitte. He was asking her to help him, but more than that, he was recognizing her as an equal. Not a cleaning lady or a hospital worker, but a fellow soldier in life's battles. Someone who understood that dignity and purpose could survive even when words failed. Maria looked around the room at the faces watching her. Medical professionals who had spent years studying the brain. A devoted wife who had stood by her husband through decades of military life. And a proud general who had just found his voice again through her understanding. Yes, she said simply. I will help. 3 weeks later, Maria found herself in an unfamiliar world. Instead of pushing her cleaning cart through empty hallways at dawn, she was sitting in brightly lit conference rooms with doctors, speech therapists, and medical researchers. Her simple uniform had been replaced with a volunteer badge that read, Patient, Communication Specialist, and a title created specifically for her unique abilities. The hospital administration had been skeptical at first. Maria lacked formal education, held no medical degrees, and spoke with an accent that some considered unprofessional. But the results with General Thompson were undeniable. In 3 weeks, his progress had exceeded what typically took months of traditional therapy. Show them the morning routine, Dr. Williams encouraged as Maria stood before a room full of medical professionals during the weekly case review. Maria felt nervous speaking to so many educated people, but she thought of General Thompson waiting for their daily session, and found her courage. "Every morning at 7 o'clock the general expects inspection," she began. "I help him check that his wheelchair is positioned correctly, his clothes are neat, and his medals are arranged properly on his bedside table." The psychiatrist in the back row raised her hand. "But isn't this encouraging obsessive behavior? Shouldn't we be helping him adapt to civilian life rather than reinforcing military structure?" Maria shook her head firmly. "You do not understand. Taking away his identity makes him sicker, not better. When he feels like a soldier, his brain remembers how to work." Eleanor Thompson nodded from her seat near the window. She attended every meeting now, fascinated by the changes in her husband. "Maria's right. Marcus has been happier these past weeks than he's been since the stroke. He has purpose again." The breakthrough had come when Maria realized that General Thompson's brain wasn't randomly accessing German words. It was specifically retrieving military vocabulary from his time training with international forces. When she began responding to his commands in basic military fashion, standing at attention, acknowledging orders, following protocols, his English began returning more frequently. "Yesterday, he gave me complete instructions for organizing the recreation room," Maria continued. "Half in English, half in German, but I understood everything. He wanted the chairs arranged like a briefing room, with clear sightlines to the television screen where patients watch news." Dr. Williams pulled up photos on his tablet showing the recreation room before and after General Thompson's reorganization. The random scatter of furniture had been replaced by neat rows with strategic spacing, wheelchair-accessible aisles, and optimal viewing angles for the mounted TV. "Other patients love the new arrangement," Dr. Williams added, "especially the veterans. They feel more comfortable, more structured. General Thompson has essentially taken command of that space, and it's improved morale for everyone." But Maria's innovation went beyond just understanding military protocol. She had begun teaching other staff members basic German military terms and showed them how to read the general's nonverbal cues. When he pointed at his water glass and said Wasser, nurses now knew he wanted water instead of assuming he was confused. The speech therapist, Dr. Jennifer Park, had initially resisted Maria's methods. Traditional aphasia treatment focused on slowly rebuilding language skills through repetition and structured exercises. Maria's approach seemed chaotic, mixing languages and encouraging what appeared to be regressive military behavior. "I have to admit, I was wrong," Dr. Park said during the meeting. "Maria's instinctive approach has unlocked pathways that months of conventional therapy couldn't reach. General Thompson is now using English phrases he hadn't accessed since his stroke, and his comprehension has improved dramatically." The success had attracted attention from other departments in the hospital. Maria found herself consulting on cases involving other multilingual patients whose brain injuries had created similar language barriers. An elderly Italian woman who could only speak in fragments of her childhood dialect. A young Hispanic construction worker whose head injury had trapped him between Spanish and English. The brain finds ways to protect what matters most, Maria explained to the residents who shadowed her during patient visits. Sometimes it hides important memories in old languages, old habits. We have to meet patients where they are, not force them to come to where we think they should be. General Thompson's progress extended beyond language recovery. His physical therapy had improved because Maria helped translate the therapist's instructions into familiar military training concepts. Instead of lift your arm 20 times, she would say 20 push-up repetitions. Soldier. His competitive instincts kicked in, pushing him to exceed expectations rather than just meet minimum requirements. The transformation wasn't limited to medical improvements. General Thompson had begun mentoring younger veterans in the hospital, using a combination of English and German commands that somehow made perfect sense to men who had served in various military branches. His wheelchair became a mobile command center as he rolled from room to room, checking on his troops. Maria watched this evolution with pride mixed with concern. She had become essential to the general's care team, but she worried about the other patients who still needed her cleaning services. The hospital had hired a replacement for her custodial duties, but she felt guilty about abandoning work that had supported her family for 15 years. "You are not abandoning anything," Eleanor told her during one of their conversations in the hospital cafeteria. "You are expanding your mission. That's what good soldiers do. They adapt to serve wherever they're needed most." The comparison to a soldier made Maria smile. She had never thought of herself in military terms, but she was beginning to understand that her years of quiet service in the hospital had taught her valuable skills. She had learned to observe without judgment, to find solutions with limited resources, and to treat every person with dignity regardless of their condition. Dr. Williams approached their table with exciting news. "Maria, I just got off the phone with the University of Chicago Medical School. They want to document your methods as part of a research study on innovative aphasia treatment. This could help thousands of patients across the country." Maria felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being suggested. "I do not know about research. I just know about helping people." "That's exactly why this matters," Dr. Williams insisted. "Medical schools teach techniques and theories, but they don't always teach the kind of human understanding you've demonstrated. Your approach could revolutionize how we treat communication disorders." Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze Maria's hand. "You saved my husband in a way that medicine alone couldn't. If sharing your gift can help other families avoid the heartbreak we've been through, isn't that worth considering?" Through the cafeteria windows, Maria could see General Thompson in the courtyard, directing a group of veteran patients in what appeared to be a modified drill formation. Their wheelchairs and walkers were arranged in precise lines as he called out commands in his mixture of languages. The men were laughing and competing to execute his orders with military precision. "Look at them," Eleanor said, following Maria's gaze. 3 months ago, Marcus was completely withdrawn, barely speaking to anyone. Now he's leading again, teaching again, being himself again. You gave him back his identity." Maria nodded slowly, beginning to understand the weight of responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. She had discovered something important, something that could help many people. But with that discovery came the obligation to share it, to step out of the comfortable shadows where she had worked for so many years. "I will do the research study," she decided, "but only if General Thompson helps. He is the real teacher. I just learned to listen." Dr. Williams grinned. "I think he'd be honored to serve his country again, even from a wheelchair. We'll make him a co-researcher." 6 months into their collaboration, Maria and General Thompson had become an unlikely research team that was turning traditional medical thinking upside down. Their morning sessions now drew observers from hospitals across the Midwest, all eager to understand how a cleaning lady and a stroke patient had revolutionized communication therapy. Maria arrived at the hospital each day at 7 sharp, no longer carrying cleaning supplies but instead armed with a notebook filled with observations, breakthrough moments, and carefully documented progress. General Thompson waited for her in the rehabilitation wing, dressed in his pressed polo shirt with his military medals pinned to a small display board beside his wheelchair. "Guten Morgen, Sergeant Santos," he greeted her, his speech now a fluid blend of English and German that had become their unique language of healing. "Good morning, General," Maria replied, instinctively straightening her posture in response to his commanding presence. "Ready for inspection?" What had started as Maria's intuitive response to the general's needs had evolved into a structured therapeutic approach that other medical centers were eager to adopt. The University of Chicago had assigned Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a neurolinguistics researcher, to document their methods and measure outcomes scientifically. "The results are remarkable," Dr. Martinez explained to a group of visiting physicians from Walter Reed Medical Center. "Traditional aphasia patients typically recover 40–60% of their pre-stroke language abilities after 1 year of therapy. General Thompson has achieved 85% recovery in just 6 months. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the full story of transformation happening in the rehabilitation wing. General Thompson had become the unofficial leader of all veteran patients, organizing daily activities that combined physical therapy with military structure. Maria served as his translator aide and, most importantly, the bridge between his military mindset and the civilian medical world. "Sergeant Santos, formation," General Thompson called out as the morning patient group gathered in the courtyard. 8 veterans in various stages of recovery, some in wheelchairs, others using walkers or canes, arranged themselves in 2 neat lines facing their commander. Maria translated the general's mixed language commands. "He wants everyone to practice balance exercises. Think of it as standing at attention. Show your strength. Show your discipline." The other veterans responded with enthusiasm that surprised their therapists. Men who had struggled with motivation during traditional therapy sessions suddenly pushed themselves to excel when framed as military training. A former Marine with a traumatic brain injury managed his first unassisted steps in months when challenged to march formation across the courtyard. Word of their success reached the attention of General Patricia Hayes, the Army's Chief of Medical Services, who arranged an official visit to observe their methods firsthand. Maria found herself terrified at the prospect of presenting their work to such a high-ranking official. "I am just a cleaning lady who got lucky," she confided to Eleanor the night before the visit. "What if she asks questions I cannot answer?" Eleanor smiled knowingly. "Maria, you've been working with the most demanding commanding officer I've ever met for 6 months. If you can handle Marcus at his most frustrated, you can handle any general." The morning of General Hayes's visit, Maria arrived to find General Thompson in full preparation mode. Despite his wheelchair and speech limitations, he had somehow managed to organize the entire rehabilitation wing like a military inspection. Patients' beds were made with hospital corners, wheelchairs were positioned at precise angles, and even the nursing staff had unconsciously begun standing straighter in his presence. "Alice Burright, Sergeant," General Thompson announced when Maria arrived. "Everything ready." General Hayes was a compact woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in every detail simultaneously. She listened intently as Dr. Williams explained the traditional challenges of treating military veterans with communication disorders. "The problem we consistently face," Dr. Williams said, "is that military personnel often resist civilian medical approaches. They're accustomed to hierarchy, clear objectives, and measurable outcomes. Traditional therapy can feel undirected and frustrating to someone used to military precision." Maria watched General Hayes's face as they entered the rehabilitation wing. The visiting general's expression shifted from professional interest to something approaching amazement as she observed the transformation. Veterans who would typically be scattered around the room watching television or sleeping were instead engaged in structured activities. One group practiced speech exercises using military phonetic alphabet. Another worked on fine motor skills by polishing replica medals and arranging uniform displays. General Thompson wheeled himself forward to greet the visitor, his posture as straight as his condition allowed. "General Hayes will come into our command," he said, his words mixing languages but his meaning unmistakable. "Thank you, General Thompson," Hayes replied, returning his salute with military precision. "I've heard remarkable things about your recovery and leadership here." Maria stepped forward nervously. "General Hayes, I should explain. General Thompson still has difficulty with English sometimes, but he is very good at leading. I help translate when needed." For the next hour, Maria demonstrated their techniques. She showed how military commands in German could unlock English responses, how structured activities improved both cognitive and physical recovery, and how treating patients as soldiers rather than victims restored their sense of purpose and identity. The breakthrough moment came when General Hayes began conversing directly with General Thompson in basic German, language she had learned during her own NATO service. Maria watched in amazement as the two officers discussed military strategy, unit organization, and leadership principles, switching effortlessly between German and English as Thompson's brain accessed different memory pathways. "This is extraordinary," General Hayes said afterward. "You've essentially created a military-civilian bridge that honors their service identity while promoting healing. This approach could transform veteran healthcare across all our medical facilities." Dr. Martinez had been documenting everything, and her findings were drawing international attention. "We're seeing similar success rates with other multilingual patients," she reported. The key insight Maria identified, that the brain preserves core identity, even when language pathways are damaged, has applications far beyond military patients. A young Vietnamese-American patient had begun responding when staff addressed her in the formal, respectful manner she remembered from her grandmother's generation. An elderly Jewish patient with dementia became more communicative when approached, with the Yiddish phrases that connected him to childhood memories. Maria has taught us that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken, Dr. Martinez explained. It's about connecting with what remains whole inside each person. The research paper documenting their approach was accepted by the New England Journal of Medicine, with Maria listed as lead author despite her protests that she lacked medical credentials. "You discovered this treatment method," Dr. Williams insisted. "Your name belongs first." But Maria's greatest satisfaction came from smaller moments. When General Thompson successfully ordered coffee in clear English for the first time. When a young veteran with PTSD began sleeping through the night after joining the General's morning formation. When Eleanor Thompson hugged her and whispered, "You gave me my husband back." The success brought new challenges. Medical centers across the country wanted Maria to train their staff. Researchers sought to interview her, and media outlets requested features about the miracle cleaning lady. The attention made her uncomfortable, but she was learning to see it as part of her mission. "My father always said that serving others is the highest honor," she told the reporter from the Chicago Tribune. "I used to serve by keeping the hospital clean. Now I serve by helping people find their voices again. The work is different, but the purpose is the same." General Thompson had become her most enthusiastic supporter and protector, using his growing English skills to deflect excessive media attention when he sensed Maria becoming overwhelmed. "Sergeant Santos is humble soldier," he would tell reporters. "She does not seek glory, only service, like all good soldiers." As their partnership evolved, Maria began to understand that she had found her true calling. The years of quiet observation while cleaning had prepared her for this moment, when listening became more important than speaking, when understanding mattered more than expertise. 1 year after their first encounter, Maria stood before the American Medical Association's annual conference in San Francisco, looking out at an audience of 3,000 physicians, researchers, and healthcare administrators. The woman who once cleaned hospital floors in the pre-dawn darkness now held a microphone, preparing to share discoveries that would reshape how medical professionals approached patient care. "I never imagined I would be standing here," she began, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had first caught General Thompson's attention. "A year ago, I was invisible to most people in the hospital where I worked. I pushed my cart, I cleaned rooms, and I went home. But sometimes being invisible teaches you to see things others miss." In the front row, General Thompson sat in his wheelchair, wearing his dress uniform for the first time since his stroke. His speech had recovered to nearly 90% of his pre-stroke ability, and he had insisted on introducing Maria to the conference. Eleanor sat beside him, tears of pride glistening in her eyes as she watched the woman who had transformed their lives address the most prestigious medical gathering in the country. The research study documenting their approach had been published 6 months earlier, but its impact continued to ripple through the medical community. The Santos-Thompson method was being implemented in veteran hospitals, civilian stroke centers, and rehabilitation facilities across North America and Europe. Early results showed consistent improvement rates that exceeded traditional therapy outcomes by significant margins. "The first thing I learned," Maria continued, "is that healing begins when we see patients as whole people, not broken bodies." General Thompson was not a damaged brain in a wheelchair. He was a career military officer whose identity and values remained intact, even when his ability to express them was compromised. The audience listened with rapt attention as Maria described the morning she had first understood the general's commands. Medical students took notes frantically, trying to capture insights that couldn't be found in textbooks. Established physicians found themselves reconsidering approaches they had used for decades. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had spent the past year studying the neurological mechanisms behind their success. Her research revealed that Maria's intuitive methods activated neural pathways that traditional therapy often failed to reach. The combination of emotional connection, cultural understanding, and identity validation created optimal conditions for brain healing. What Maria discovered, Dr. Martinez explained in her presentation that followed, is that the brain's capacity for recovery is greatly enhanced when patients feel valued, understood, and connected to their core identity. Her approach doesn't just treat symptoms, it treats the whole human being. The conference had allocated an entire day to presentations about their work, but the most powerful session was the live demonstration. Via video link from Chicago, conference attendees watched Maria conduct a therapy session with 3 different patients: General Thompson, Anna Kowalski, a Polish immigrant with severe aphasia, and James Runningbear, a Native American veteran with traumatic brain injury. Each patient presented unique challenges, but Maria's approach remained consistent: respect their background, understand their cultural context, and help them access healing through familiar frameworks. With Anna, she used Polish lullabies and traditional family roles. With James, she incorporated Native American storytelling traditions and respect for elder wisdom. Culture is not something separate from medicine, Maria explained to the audience. Culture is the foundation that holds people together when everything else falls apart. When we ignore someone's cultural identity, we miss the most powerful tool for healing. The demonstration showed Anna successfully completing complex language exercises when framed as preparing to teach her grandchildren about Polish heritage. James showed dramatic improvement in memory recall when asked to share traditional stories rather than perform standard cognitive tests, but it was General Thompson who provided the most powerful moment of the presentation. Speaking clearly in English with only occasional German phrases, he addressed the medical conference directly. "Before my stroke, I commanded thousands of soldiers," he said, his voice carrying across the auditorium with military precision. "I thought leadership meant giving orders and expecting obedience. Sergeant Santos taught me that true leadership means understanding what people need, even when they cannot ask for it themselves." The general paused, looking directly at Maria with the deep respect of one soldier recognizing another. She saw past my broken words to find the soldier who still lived inside. That is not just good medicine, that is good leadership. That is what healing truly means. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Maria felt overwhelmed by the response, but also deeply humbled. She thought of her father, Sergeant Carlos Santos, and wondered if he would be proud of how she was carrying on his legacy of service in ways he never could have imagined. After the conference, Maria was approached by representatives from major medical schools offering teaching positions, research institutes proposing collaboration, and healthcare systems seeking to implement her methods on a larger scale. The attention was flattering, but also intimidating for someone who had spent most of her career in the background. "I do not know about teaching doctors," she confided to Eleanor during their flight back to Chicago. "I barely finished high school in El Salvador. How can I teach people who studied for so many years?" Eleanor smiled knowingly. "Maria, you have something they spent all those years in school trying to learn. Wisdom. You know how to see people as human beings first and patients second. That's not something you can get from textbooks." The success had brought unexpected opportunities but also unexpected pressures. Maria now split her time between direct patient care, training other healthcare workers, and traveling to conferences and medical centers. The hospital in Chicago had created a new department called Cultural Therapeutic Services with Maria as director. Her team included translators, cultural liaisons, and healthcare workers from diverse backgrounds who understood that healing often required more than medicine alone. They worked with immigrant patients struggling with language barriers, elderly patients whose dementia had regressed them to childhood languages, and anyone whose cultural identity had become a barrier to effective treatment. General Thompson had become her most trusted colleague and advocate. His recovery had progressed to the point where he could serve as a peer counselor for other veteran patients, and his insights had proven invaluable in developing new therapeutic protocols. "Sergeant Santos," he said during one of their weekly planning meetings, "we have created something bigger than either of us imagined. But I worry that success might take you away from what matters most, the individual patients who need your gift." Maria shared his concern. The administrative duties, research obligations, and speaking engagements were important, but they sometimes felt distant from the hands-on healing work that had started their journey together. She found herself missing the simple intimacy of one-on-one patient interactions. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Jennifer Park, the speech therapist who had initially resisted Maria's methods, approached her with a proposal. "What if we created a fellowship program?" Dr. Park suggested. "We could train healthcare workers from different cultural backgrounds to use your approach with their own communities. That way you could multiply your impact without losing the personal connection that makes your work so effective." The idea excited Maria. Instead of trying to be everywhere at once, she could teach others to carry forward the principles she had discovered. The first fellowship class included a former Vietnamese refugee who worked with Asian immigrant patients, a Lakota social worker specializing in Native American veterans, and a young doctor whose grandparents had survived the Holocaust. Each culture has its own pathways to healing, Maria explained to her first group of fellows. "My job is not to teach you my specific methods, but to help you discover the healing traditions within your own communities." The fellowship program launched with support from the Department of Veterans Affairs and the National Institutes of Health. Within 6 months, Similar programs were being developed at medical centers across the country, each adapted to serve the unique cultural needs of their local populations. General Thompson watched these developments with the satisfaction of a commanding officer seeing his mission accomplished. His own recovery had plateaued at about 95% of his pre-stroke abilities, a remarkable outcome that exceeded all medical expectations. More importantly, he had found a new sense of purpose in mentoring other patients and supporting Maria's expanding work. "You know what the most important lesson has been?" he asked Maria during one of their evening conversations in the hospital courtyard. "Sometimes the people who can help us most are the ones we never notice. You were in that hospital for 15 years before I saw you, really saw you. How many other invisible helpers are there, waiting for someone to recognize their gifts?" The question haunted Maria in the best possible way. She began paying attention to the quiet, overlooked staff members in every hospital she visited. The orderlies who knew which patients needed extra comfort, the housekeeping staff who noticed subtle changes in patient behavior, the volunteers who had developed their own informal methods for connecting with difficult cases. Her final presentation of the year, delivered at the International Conference on Cultural Medicine in Geneva, focused on this theme, the wisdom of the invisible. She spoke about the untapped knowledge that existed in every healthcare facility, held by people whose insights were dismissed because they lacked formal credentials or spoke with accents or worked in supposedly unskilled positions. "I was one of those invisible people," she concluded. "But I learned that being invisible can also mean being free to observe without judgment, to listen without agenda, to see what others miss because you are not distracted by your own importance." Perhaps the future of medicine lies not just in new technologies or breakthrough drugs, but in learning to recognize and value the wisdom that already exists all around us. The standing ovation was warm and sustained, but what mattered most to Maria was the message she received later that evening from General Thompson back in Chicago. "Mission accomplished, Sergeant. Your father would be proud." 2 years after the general had first barked his incomprehensible command, Maria Santos stood in the same hospital corridor where their journey had begun. But everything had changed. The rehabilitation wing now bore a small, bronze plaque reading, "The Santos Thompson Center for Cultural, Therapeutic Medicine," and the walls displayed photographs of patients from dozens of countries who had found healing through culturally sensitive care. General Thompson waited for her in his usual spot by the window, but he was no longer alone. Beside him sat Captain Sarah Chen, a young Army officer recovering from a roadside bomb injury in Afghanistan, and beside her was Ahmad al-Hassan, a Syrian refugee whose stroke had left him speaking only fragments of Arabic. Both were part of the newest group of patients benefiting from the therapeutic approach that had transformed not just their hospital, but healthcare thinking around the world. "Guten Morgen, Director Santos," General Thompson greeted her with a grin. He enjoyed using her official title, especially since Maria still insisted everyone call her simply Maria. "Good morning, General," she replied, then turned to greet the newer patients. "Good morning, Captain Chen, Sabah al-Khair Ahmad." The Syrian man's face lit up at hearing his native greeting. "Sabah an-Nur, Maria," he responded, then added in careful English, "Thank you for helping me find my words again." This was the new reality Maria had helped create. The fellowship program had trained over 200 healthcare workers in 18 countries. The Santos Thompson method was being taught in medical schools across 3 continents. But more importantly, thousands of patients were receiving care that honored their cultural identity while promoting healing. Maria's own transformation had been just as dramatic. The timid cleaning lady who once worked in shadows now directed a department of 47 staff members. She had written 2 books about cultural medicine, testified before Congress about veteran health care, and received honorary doctorate degrees from 4 universities. Yet she still insisted on spending at least 2 hours each day in direct patient care. "I never want to forget where this all started," she explained to a reporter from National Geographic, who was documenting their work. "The moment I lose touch with actual patients is the moment I lose my way." General Thompson had become the hospital's unofficial ambassador and Maria's closest collaborator. His recovery remained remarkable. He could speak, think, and lead with nearly all his pre-stroke capabilities. But more than that, he had found a new mission that gave his life deep meaning. Before my stroke, I thought I knew what service meant, he told visitors during the center's weekly tours. I commanded troops, I completed missions, I served my country with honor. But I never understood that sometimes the greatest service comes from accepting help, from being vulnerable enough to let someone else lead. The success had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The World Health Organization had asked Maria to consult on developing cultural sensitivity guidelines for international medical missions. The United Nations wanted her input on treating refugees with trauma and communication disorders. Even Hollywood had approached about making a movie about their story, though Maria had politely declined. This is not about fame or recognition, she explained to Eleanor Thompson during one of their weekly coffee meetings. This is about changing how we see each other, how we value different kinds of knowledge. Eleanor had become Maria's closest friend and strongest supporter. Watching her husband's recovery had transformed her own understanding of healing and resilience. She now volunteered at the center, helping families navigate the emotional challenges of caring for loved ones with communication disorders. You saved Marcus, Eleanor told Maria. But more than that, you saved our marriage, our family, our hope for the future. How do you adequately thank someone for that? The impact extended far beyond individual patients. The center's research had documented significant improvements in patient satisfaction, reduced hospital stays, and better long-term outcomes for culturally diverse populations. Insurance companies were beginning to recognize cultural, therapeutic services as cost-effective treatments, rather than optional add-ons. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had been promoted to head of neurolinguistics research at the University of Chicago, largely based on her work documenting the Santos-Thompson method. Maria has proven that the most sophisticated medical technology means nothing if we can't connect with patients as human beings, she said, during a presentation to the American Academy of Neurology, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The government of El Salvador had invited Maria to return to her homeland to establish a center for treating Civil War veterans with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. The invitation came with an offer to name the facility after her father, Sergeant Carlos Santos. I am honored, Maria wrote in her response, but I believe my father would prefer that we name it for all the invisible soldiers who served and were forgotten. Let it be called the Center for All Who Serve. The ceremony dedicating the El Salvador Center took place on the anniversary of her father's disappearance. Maria stood before a gathering of former soldiers, family members who had lost loved ones in the war, and medical professionals eager to learn her methods. General Thompson had insisted on attending, making the journey despite his ongoing mobility challenges. 35 years ago, my father taught me that service to others is the highest calling, Maria told the assembled crowd, speaking in Spanish for the first time at a public event. I thought I had lost that lesson when I lost him, but General Thompson showed me that my father's teaching had been with me all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. As she spoke, Maria noticed an elderly man in the back of the room who bore a striking resemblance to her father. After her presentation, he approached with tears in his eyes. I served with Carlos Santos, he said quietly. He saved my life during the fighting in Chalatenango. He would be so proud of what you have accomplished. The reunion with one of her father's comrades provided closure Maria hadn't realized she needed. She learned that Sergeant Santos had died protecting civilians during an evacuation, that his last words had been about his daughter Maria, and his hope that she would find a way to serve others in peacetime. He always said you had his gift for seeing what others missed, the old soldier told her. I never understood what he meant until today. The El Salvador Center became operational within 6 months, staffed by local healthcare workers trained in Maria's methods, but adapted for Central American cultural contexts. The success there led to requests for similar programs in Guatemala, Honduras, and other countries struggling with the long-term effects of conflict and displacement. Back in Chicago, Maria found herself facing a new challenge: how to maintain the personal, intimate nature of her work while meeting growing global demand for her expertise. The solution came from General Thompson, who suggested creating a global network of culturally sensitive care centers, each led by local practitioners but connected through shared principles and ongoing collaboration. You cannot be everywhere, Sergeant, he told her using the rank that had become his affectionate nickname for her, but your ideas can be everywhere, adapted and improved by people who understand their own communities better than any outsider ever could. The network launched with 12 centers on 4 continents. Each facility was staffed primarily by local healthcare workers from the communities they served, with Maria and her team providing initial training and ongoing consultation. The approach ensured that cultural sensitivity remained authentic rather than imposed from outside. As Maria stood in the hospital corridor where everything had begun, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. A simple act of paying attention, really seeing a frustrated patient instead of just walking past, had led to discoveries that were helping people around the world. General Thompson wheeled over to join her, his movements confident and purposeful. "Penny for your thoughts, Director." "I was thinking about invisible people," Maria replied. "How many others are out there right now working quietly, seeing things the rest of us miss? How many potential solutions are walking past us every day because we do not think to look?" The general nodded thoughtfully. "That might be the most important lesson of all. Not just how to heal people who are different from us, but how to recognize wisdom wherever it comes from." Through the window, they could see the courtyard where veterans still gathered each morning for the formation exercises that had become a beloved tradition. New patients mixed with graduates of the program who returned as volunteers. Different languages, different uniforms, different stories, but united in the understanding that healing happened best when people felt valued, understood, and connected to something larger than themselves. "Mission accomplished?" General Thompson asked, echoing the phrase he had used to mark the end of successful operations throughout his military career. Maria smiled, watching a young Iraqi veteran teaching Arabic phrases to a new patient from Somalia. "No, General. Mission continuing. This is the kind of mission that never really ends. It just gets passed on to the next group of people willing to see what others miss." As they watched, the newest cleaning lady, a young woman from Ethiopia who spoke 5 languages, paused in her work to help an elderly patient who seemed confused and distressed. She knelt beside his wheelchair, speaking softly in what sounded like Italian, and the man's face relaxed for the first time since his arrival. Maria and General Thompson exchanged knowing looks. Somewhere another invisible helper had just noticed what everyone else had missed. The cycle was continuing, the mission was expanding, and the work of healing was being carried forward by new hands, new hearts, and new eyes trained to see the dignity and wisdom that existed in every human being. "Come on, General," Maria said, turning away from the window. "We have patients waiting for us." "Yes, Sergeant," he replied with military precision and unmistakable affection. "Lead the way."